Hi, and welcome to today's Solo Together podcast with me, Courtney Wren. Today we're going to be diving into parenting the nervous system, the regulation myth that may surprise you. And we are going to talk about this myth and then diving into what actual regulation looks like and the two different types of nervous systems that are important to understand. And then I want to dive into what this generation of kids is actually here to teach us in our nervous systems. And then if you stick around till the end, I'm going to share some actual practical tips on bedtime, how to do bedtime. So let's dive in. I'm excited about this topic. I've actually taught it in a few different in a preschool. I've taught it online a bit. This comes up a lot with clients. So nervous system, somatics, it's all the rage. People are talking about it. This is our generation. We are the generation that is starting to heal the nervous system. We're dropping in deeper to embodiment and presence to get into the nigglies of the nervous system, and not only learning how to regulate our own nervous systems, but unwinding the layers of trauma that live in our bodies and nervous systems from way up the lineage. And so it's an exciting time because we're the first generation of parents that are actually starting to be able to parent with an awareness of the nervous system, with actual words to talk about it, and where we are understanding that a big part of our role is actually to relate consciously with our children's nervous systems and to help them regulate. And from my perspective, this is huge because, when we think about helping a child organically unfold and trusting the inner wisdom of their DNA, their biology, then we step away from the idea that there's something we're needing to control or fix, right? And instead, it's just getting curious about in that innate unfolding of a child, in that innate code that lives inside the DNA, that the wisdom that starts to emerge and develop. How do we actually meet that at the edges and provide a grounded, stable, loving space for that unfolding to happen? And this is really what having a regulated nervous system as a parent is we're becoming that safe nest for their nervous system to evolve. And the more regulated our nervous system is, the more regulated theirs is. Now, the myth of what's going on in all of this, awakening, nervous system awakening. And I just want to paint this picture is a blessing that I have had in my life is when I was in my early 20s, my nervous system was not well. I was so dysregulated. I was so unwell, carrying a lot of trauma, ADHD diagnoses, generalized anxiety, on psych meds, not sleeping at night on sleep meds. I had reached the pinnacle of dysregulation, which the gift of that was I couldn't ignore it. It was so loud and getting louder and louder. So I actually ended up getting in with a somatic therapist in my early 20s. I think I was 22, and diving so deep into it because as soon as I experienced a somatic therapy session, which is tuning into the nervous system itself, not thinking from the mind, not necessarily energy work, actually noticing the nervous system, learning how to track it, and learning how to help it heal. It was a game changer. I was like, wow, what is this? So I dove really deep, and it turned out, I didn't know this at the time, but it was very cutting edge. Like the therapist I had was at the cutting edge. So I actually studied and went really deep with somatics early on. And it's meant that in my parenting journey, in conceiving, in being pregnant, in all of it, I not only had reached a certain level of mastery in my own nervous system and in understanding the nervous system, but I also was then able to bring that into how I parent. And so throughout parenting my son, who's now almost 4, I have had this lens of my role is holding space for his nervous system to develop in its healthiest way and trusting the consciousness of his nervous system, which is a unique thing. I get to bridge the professional, like I'm a therapist. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people on healing their nervous system, and I'm parenting. And so I've got this cool overlap, this lens that I've gotten to work with, which I'm so grateful for because it feels like a really important piece that I can add to the collective. And it's helped me with parenting so much. Knowing how to parent the nervous system for me helps me relax around all the ideas in your mind that can happen as a parent. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. I should be doing, because really my job is just to track and attune to my son's nervous system, which is going to tell me what's needed. And my nervous system, the more connected it is with him and the more regulated I am, is actually also going to have deep wisdom of how to respond. And anything that is not based on the tracking of that, I know is not needed. Whereas where a lot of parents get stuck is they get paralyzed in all of the ideas about what's needed versus the tracking our child and tracking their nervous system. And I'm going to get into this because this is the juice. But first I want to name the myth, okay? And I want to give you the context of where I'm coming from. I'm in the trenches of motherhood. And the myth, okay. So one of the biggest myths, and a lot of you probably know this in a way, but I want to get into it even more, is there's a really big myth out there that regulation equals calm. So there's a lot of labeling and perceiving children who have a lot of life energy, who have a lot of energy to move. They're automatically seen as dysregulated. There's a lot of misunderstanding that children who are go, 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 that it means that they're dysregulated. There's a lot of misunderstanding of thinking that children who are calm are regulated, or that children who are lower energy or moving slower, that automatically they're regulated. We have developed an understanding that regulation equals calm. And I'm here to say that's not true. And I think some of this actually comes from school systems and systems where obviously in the system, when you have a lot of children that you're caring for, it's easier to care for the kids that are more calm, in quotation marks. I'm going to dive into that a little more. That is easier to manage. And so, of course, over time, we've developed this idea, and same with parenting, right? Like if you have a child that's, in quotation marks, calmer or more mild, that's easier, theoretically. Now, what's happened is in our consciousness, it's created this idea that there's something wrong with children who have more aliveness and activation in their nervous system, and that everything is great with the child who sits quietly and does their own thing and is, coloring, let's just say. And in that, what's sad is we've lost the actual essence of what it means to be a vital, alive, dynamic human. Now, before I go into what regulation actually looks like, what I want to say about that is it makes sense to me that there is also this idea about calm, because when we're first starting to heal the nervous system, when we're first starting to become aware of how activated and overstimulated our nervous system actually is, the very first step of healing is to realize that we're needing to turn down the dial, right? Like the first step is, whoa, I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so overstimulated. I'm so that we're actually needing to bring in things like, well, how do I calm the energy? How do I slow the energy down? How do I take some things off my plate? How do I destimulate? That is a very wise first step in healing, because if we're overwhelmed, if we're overstimulated, we're not actually going to be able to heal the nervous system because we're just overwhelmed. So the first step is that we've got to calm things. We've got to learn how to breathe. We've got to learn how to take a step back. But that's not regulation. That's a step towards destimulating so we can start to work towards regulating. So many of us have entered into that first stage. Many of you might be in that first stage, and it's really important to hang out in that stage. That's a very important stage. And maybe even for your child, that's part of the stage, right? Is we're just destimulating. Very important. But again, that's not the end goal of what regulation is. It's just a step, okay? Now, what is actual regulation? Actual regulation is when our nervous system has built capacity to hold life energy and the ebbs and flows of life energy. So in a nervous system that is regulated, it actually knows how to move between calm, low, all the way to sleeping, low levels of energy, all the way to excited, enthusiastic, active, moving your body. And it's the capacity to move between these two states and to stay in a flow with that. That's what actual regulation is, for example, with my son, he has tons of life energy. He can go all day. And then he hits nap time and his nervous system starts to slow down. He gets sleepy. He gets restful. He falls asleep. He wakes up. A little more life energy starts to come in. He's kind of tender, a little grumpy. He gets a bit grumpy. He's got grumpiness. And then, life energy comes back in and now he's starting to get interested in life again. Now he's excited about something and now he's going. Yeah, excited. Woo, do. And then bedtime. It's 6 o'clock. Okay. He's starting to get sleepy. He's slowing down. He's rubbing his eyes. He's laying on the floor a bit. He's looking at a book. He's asking to go to bed. Okay, we're climbing into bed. And then he goes to sleep. So this is an example, right? Now, that can also look like, in the day, lots and lots of excitement, and then sitting and reading a book and slowing down. Woo, this is so fun, big body movement. And then, slowing down and coloring, and this kind of movement. But what I want you to understand is that in the myth, we've actually created a very small window of tolerance, it's called. And this is the window within which we have given children permission of what we think is regulated or what is allowed in terms of the amount of energy. So it's a small window. When we make the window really small for children, like you can be this active or this activated or this whatever, and it's us deciding that. And I'm going to go in a little bit about our own nervous system, but we're actually limiting the child's actual ability to develop true regulation. Because in true regulation, we actually want them to build capacity to hold lots of energy. We actually want them to build the capacity to have a lot of vitality moving through their body. So much life energy moving through. And not that it tips now into anxiety and overwhelm and stress and overriding, but instead so much life energy and they're in it. They feel good. They're riding the edge of that. And then, and then now they calm. So a way of thinking about this is a regulated nervous system is like a beautiful bell curve over and over throughout the day. And we ideally want to build a child who has capacity for lots of life energy and then lots of slowing down and calm. The thing that gets tricky for parents is, first of all, we've all been told, that a calm child is better, or that's too much life energy in that child. Like there's so much of this culturally. And we are deeply impacted by the capacity our nervous system has to actually be present and regulated with the life energy that our child brings. So for example, if your child has a lot of life energy and vitality, and they're expressing it and they hit the edge of what your nervous system has been taught is allowed. So for example, they start to be in a level of life energy that your nervous system can't hold. It's not able to stay regulated in that level of life energy. We can start to project onto our child that they are dysregulated. And I see this all the time, where the parent is actually getting overwhelmed by the child's amount of life energy. And instead of the parent attuning, how is my child doing right now? The parent instead is feeling their own overwhelm, their own dysregulation. And then they project onto the child that the child is dysregulated. And then they start to try to calm the child and do things with the child to try to calm the energy, telling the child a story that there's something wrong, when it's actually the parent's nervous system that's feeling dysregulated and overwhelmed, and the parent's actually needing to bring their attention to their own nervous system. What do I need to be able to ground myself, to calm myself, and to start to not only do that, not only help myself ground, but then to also teach my nervous system how to relate with this level of activation, which, if we do that in a right way, can actually help our nervous system grow in its capacity for life energy. And so just take a minute and think about that, because it can actually be super tricky. We're so close with our children. It can be super tricky to tell the difference sometimes between what's happening in ourselves and what's happening in our children, right? So for example, a way that I work with this is when my son is in a big energy, like right now, he's got this thing where he makes these loud sounds and big noises, and he's like moving all over this place, and like, it's so intense, and really when I step back, he's just alive and vibrant and excited and making sounds and being creative. Like that's all that's happening. But my nervous system, is hitting its edge of what it's able to stay present with. And I can feel all the ways that adults weren't able to be present with me in that amount of life energy, or where I wasn't met relationally in that, and it wasn't okay, right? How many times I was told that's not okay. And so what I do with things like that is I slow down in myself when I notice those edges, and I track him first. So what I do is I look at him. So Courtney, really take him in. Does he actually look dysregulated? I get that he's in a huge amount of life energy, lots of sounds, lots of movement. But when I look at him, does he look in distress? Is he distressed? Is he feeling freaked out and ungrounded? And it's amazing how often I'll look, and he's actually glowing. He's got a big smile on his face. He's putting on his boots, and he's able to function fully, and he's good. He can hold that much life energy. And then I feel myself, and I'm contracted. I'm feeling frustrated. I want it to stop. Oh, okay, we're hitting the edge of my nervous system's capacity. And this is how I practice tracking the difference between when he's dysregulated versus when I'm dysregulated. Now, if he was dysregulated, because there are moments, right? Then what I'm going to notice is things like he's not able to play. Like he's in so much, he can't play. He's not being creative. He's not able to explore, right? His face has a look of distress in some way, he's not able to focus or do anything. These are some examples of what you would see, right? And so notice that we're not judging dysregulation based on the amount of energy. We're assessing dysregulation based on the capacity for that person to be in that much energy and to still be in themselves and able to function and present and relational, right? Yeah. So this is big. And I want to now go into describing, this is so important, okay? So there's two types of nervous systems that our children can have. And of course, there's so much diversity within this, but this for me, when I learned this, was a game changer in understanding parenting and the nervous system and what's going on in the different parent-child dynamics, and also understanding our world more. So, and you'll notice yourself now noticing people in a different way. Now, the first person I heard this from was Stan Tatkin, and his metaphor is that there are submarines and there are airplanes. A metaphor I like to work with is there are kiddos and adults who have whale nervous systems, and there's kiddos and adults that have hummingbird nervous systems. So I'm going to describe these a little bit. So the hummingbird nervous system, right, is the nervous system that is, it's sort of like, it tips more, it's stronger in the sympathetic part of the nervous system. So basically, the hummingbird, it can go dorsal parasympathetic, which dorsal parasympathetic is a simple way to think about this is the brakes. It's the calming mechanism, it's the slowing down mechanism, it's the thing that comes on to calm us. And the sympathetic is the part of the nervous system that's like activating life energy. It's the gas pedal. Children who have more hummingbird nervous systems will tend to have more sympathetic energy. So they will be more fiery. They will have more movement. They will have more vitality and expressiveness. They're going to move their body more. Their nervous system will have a high capacity for life energy. Now, when this kind of child gets dysregulated, they are more likely to show anxiety, right? Or explosive emotions, let's say, okay? That will be more their tendency. Then there's the whale nervous systems. And the whale nervous system is just like a whale, right? The whale dives deep underwater. It moves slow. It can make beautiful jumps out of the water, but it takes a lot of speed. They got to swim really deep and then go up, and it takes a lot of energy. And they can swim so low down. And so if you think about this, these are the kiddos that, the babies who sleep a lot, where it's like, oh, they just sleep so much, the big Buddha babies, the babies that just sit a lot, they like sit and look around and, they move slow. These are the kids, at school who are more likely to sit more, to want to do things that are more like building something or coloring, or they tend to be more mild. So the brakes are on more, right? There's more of that calming. Now, both the whale and the hummingbird can be regulated. Oh, wait, I've missed one thing. When whales are dysregulated, their tendency is going to be to either shut down more. So, for example, get avoidant, to move away from things, to shut down, like get really tired, get really heavy, get depressed, want to dissociate, more of those kinds of symptoms when they're dysregulated. Now, both the whale and the hummingbird can be regulated, right? So a hummingbird kid can have all this energy and vitality and movement, and then totally be able to dip down and move into the down throughout the day, and then move back up into the vitality. And, a whale kiddo can be more whale and have the capacity to have more life energy and move their body and move between, right? But they sort of have a tendency. Now, adults also have that, a tendency. And what's fascinating is we tend to have an easier time parenting the child who has a similar nervous system type to us versus the child who has the opposite nervous system type. So for example, I'm more of a hummingbird nervous system and my son is a hummingbird nervous system. And so I can relate to him a lot. I can really relate with him. Like I get it, whereas, my mom and my brother, one of my brothers, are more whale nervous systems. And it's been harder for me to understand that. There's like a lack of relatability. Like, I don't really get what's going on for you, And this is where learning about these concepts is helping me understand more about how nervous systems relate and to start to normalize these two different nervous systems. Now, in terms of parenting, the thing that I really want to call attention to is in our culture, what we've tended to do, especially with children, is that the hummingbird kids, we've labeled them as hyperactive. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but it's been like a blanket thing, right? Like if you have a kid with a lot of vitality, lots of movement, lots of like almost automatically people start labeling that there's something wrong, that they're dysregulated, okay? Without attuning deeper to, are they? Because there are some kids that's absolutely happening. But are they, and where are they getting dysregulated? And where is it actual vitality? And then we've also labeled the whale children as, really compliant, well-behaved, easy to relate to. Now, what happens in that is it's a huge disservice to both children because there are lots of whale children that are super dysregulated. They're in a lot of distress inside, and they're not being attuned with or noticed because it's quiet. And so it's very common with whale children that they end up getting neglected emotionally because people aren't attuning to what's actually happening inside. And they're not intervening to help them come into regulation. Because if we think of a whale child, what they are needing is they're actually needing parents, adults, to attune to their level of are they moving towards life energy? So if you think of for a whale child, they are not going to need help necessarily calming down or being less active or not, this kind of thing. They're actually needing support to come into life energy, to get up and move a little bit, to engage themselves a little more. They're needing us to track if they're going too far into the dorsal and they're not mobilizing or they're not, moving towards things in life. A really good example of this is, I gave the example of the baby that sleeps a lot. Well, what can happen with that is that, if you have a baby that sleeps a lot, that could be really lovely, right? They sleep a lot, it's all relaxed, cuddles. But what can happen is we leave the baby over in the bassinet or we leave them in the car seat and they're just sleeping a lot. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but what we do want to get curious about is their nervous system going a little too far into dorsal that they're not actually engaging enough? So, an example of what you'd need to do with a whale child is actually coming over and making eye contact and squeezing their body. There's lots of little whale children that can actually slide into freeze or collapse and no one's noticing it because they're not getting engaged enough. They're not getting enough eye contact, enough touch, enough engagement because they're so chill that people aren't noticing. So we actually need to track for, are they going into a freeze? Are they going into a collapse? Are they in their body, squeezing their body, making eye contact, holding them more? If they're sleeping all the time, it's like holding them more and so that they're feeling your life energy. And with a whale child, you're going to need to actually intentionally bring in more active, playful energy. So whereas we have this idea that children will just move towards, things that they need, not necessarily with a whale child, especially if they're dysregulated somehow or sliding too far, they're actually going to need you to pull them into life. You got to come in and we got to bring in some spark. Let's bring in some spark, not in a fixing way, but in a, that's what they're needing to regulate more, to come into that beautiful rhythm, right? And we have to get good at tracking for when they're frozen. What can happen for babies is they seem calm, but when you really look in their eyes, they're actually in distress. They're frozen inside. They're not in themselves. But it can get missed again because it's quiet, right? So we got to get better at tracking for that with kiddos, right? And bringing them in, the classic thing too, right, is like a group of kids, and the whale child will tend to be the one that hangs out at the edge maybe, or they move really slow through the space, and then they go over here and they do this quiet activity over here, and and it can be really beautiful and so lovely. And we need to notice, are they needing help bridging into the life energy of the group? Are they needing help us to support? And by that, I even just mean bringing in your own nervous system, not necessarily even guiding them, but bringing in your own nervous system and bringing a bit of life energy, right? Maybe they're needing you to come over and go on the playground with them and bring in a little life energy because their nervous system's having trouble activating that energy, right? And then we've got the hummingbird kiddos, right? And where they can really get pathologized, or the problem that can happen, or where we can end up neglecting them is they tend to get a lot of don't do that, stop that, oh, that child's out of control, different things like this. It's been so interesting for me parenting a really strong hummingbird child who is definitely regulated. He is regulated. He just has a lot of vitality, a lot of life energy. And what I notice is when we are out and about, he will spark in people so much joy and life energy. Like he was like, we would ride on this horse named Rain. And the woman described that when this horse had many children and toddlers on it, but when Cedar got on the horse, she said he was the only child that the horse would start to like go faster and get more bouncy, and she would get excited. It's like, that's what his energy does, right? And that's the gift of his energy. He comes in and he gets things moving, and there's this aliveness, and people have joy. And I cannot tell you how many times I get glared at by other adults, probably who had more whale children or themselves are a whale and can't relate. They're glaring at me like I'm not controlling him enough. And because we're at the grocery store and he's got his grocery cart and he's on a mission and he's getting this and that. And then he's running over there and he's, like there's lots of aliveness and movement and literally he will be doing nothing wrong. And people will be glaring at me like, you don't have your child under control and he is out of control and he has too much life energy. And I get it, because there are moments where things happen in that, but so often it's literally just he's in life energy. But what it always lets me know is that's a barometer for that person's capacity to be with vitality, right? When they're around vitality, they're not able to hold it in their nervous system and to feel it, they're not able to be like, enjoy and wow, life energy. And instead they're contracting and shaming and judging, right? And I'm not judging them because I get it. They might not know. They if you haven't raised a hummingbird little boy, and maybe you have a whale little girl, let's say, it's going to be really hard to relate and look over at the the hummingbird mama and get what's happening, right? But vice versa too, right? Because what I notice with the friends that I have and the clients that I've had that have whale children, The whale children, where they can struggle is in self-activating. Like my son, I don't have to do anything to motivate him in anything. Like he is so motivated. He's out there, he's trying, he's doing it. Whereas, the mamas of whale children, they have to put a lot of energy into motivating their children and let's try this new hard thing and let's push into our edges and that is more what they're having to work with, and I'm the mom at the playground that my kid is like on the thing, doing the thing, and all the kids are watching him do the thing. And then parents are saying to me, oh, I wish my child would try that, right? And so this is the whole spectrum of the challenges that we're being with, right? So this is me just wanting to map out, nothing is wrong with any of these kiddos, and we want to understand where there are. Now, you might have a child who is a whale or a hummingbird and they're dysregulated. And this is where you want to start to get the hang of tracking. Are they dysregulated in this moment? Are they not? Am I dysregulated in this moment? Am I not? And getting the hang of, for yourself, building your capacity for life energy. That, if I were to say the number one thing, if you want to parent your child's nervous system, is you need to build the capacity. Because even an example is, if you're a whale mama of a whale kiddo, and part of regulating them is to actually help mobilize their nervous system more. I've seen this a lot, where then the whale mama will start to tell the child, you need to do this more, you need to do, and they try to do it to the child, but the mom is very heavily in dorsal collapse freeze, right? It's not going to work. The only way your child is going to be able to find that life energy inside is you are going to have to start to mobilize yourself more, right? So if you're wanting to help their nervous system find the life energy, you got to find that life energy. You've got to build the capacity in your nervous system to penetrate life more and spark yourself and have more, build your capacity for life energy, right? And the vice versa. If you have a hummingbird child who is dysregulated, let's say, and they are getting frazzled, and you're a hummingbird mom and you're also frazzled, and you're doing all these techniques to calm them down, it will not work. You have to build the tone in your nervous system to be able to regulate and calm or down-regulate. And that is what's actually going to help them. An example is when I was first learning how to put my son to sleep when we stopped breastfeeding, he was 2.5. That's a journey, right? Because he would fall asleep so easily with the breast milk. So it's like, okay, so now we got to learn this. And of course, I don't know how many of you mamas know this experience, but when we would lay down, if I had any kind of dysregulation in me at all, or like stress about I want him to go to sleep now, or he's not calming down, then he would not downregulate. He would not. So I had to learn how to support my nervous system to downregulate. I had to, instead of doing something to him, it was me inside, my nervous system down-regulating, slowing down, and my nervous system getting into a nice, deep restfulness. And doing that over and over in relation to him, he learned how to do it. And I wasn't doing anything to him. I was doing it. And then he started to do it. And now he has that so wired into his nervous system that he's got it. That's there. That's laid in. And this is where it's our system teaching them. So I hope this is helpful. The last thing that I am like geeking out about is, and I feel like this is important, okay? I think to understand the nervous system and who this generation of kiddos is right now, we have to understand where we've come from. So I facilitate something called constellations, family constellations, which are looking at the ancestral patterns and influences that show up in our nervous systems and in our bodies that then play out in our lives, okay? And I won't go too much into the process, but basically, I have done many constellation workshops over many, many years. and consistently watched that what the constellations show, and basically the constellations are where we're inviting people to basically feel into the field with their body and notice what was happening in people's ancestral lineages. It's so cool. Encourage you to check it out if you don't know what I'm talking about. But essentially, over and over and over, what it shows is that the generation above us, the generation the generation above that, and the generation above that, okay, so about 3 above me, let's say, there was a lot of trauma that happened. And some of this, a lot of this is war and immigration, right? So many people immigrated, displacement, the Great Depression, bam, 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 bam. Also more industrialization of things. So all of these things created a numbness and a shutdown and a collapse in the nervous system. Okay. And it's wild. You see this over and over and over again in all the lineages. There's this chunk of people generationally that were more shut down, more numb. I also think that this also has to do with the school system and birth, right? Because that is around the time where people were being born in the hospital and every mom was drugged and put under while they gave birth, right? Which all adds to numbness, shutdown, collapse. So you have these generations that are numb and collapse. But here's the thing. The person themselves who's in that, they don't know, right? Because your nervous system is numb and collapsed and shut down and frozen, but you're still functioning. You're going. This is the magic of being human. Is our biology is amazing. It can carry all that trauma and shut down, and it can still go. It can still produce. It can still show up for life. And that's also survival, right? So those generations often accomplished a lot. They did a lot. They were, do. And they perceived that they were fine. But it was survival. There's all these layers of survival in there, right? So the thing to understand is a lot of what we've understood about children was these people as children, right? So a lot of the literature and the way that schools have been designed and the way that our society has been designed was based on children who had more shutdown, who had more collapse, who were carrying more trauma, and were in more survival. And that became the barometer of what a healthy child is and what a regulated nervous system is, right? But what I know as a trauma therapist is, if you have a whole bunch of kids who are pretty traumatized, in a lot of survival, a lot of collapse, a lot of shutdown, they're mostly going to do what you tell them, and their nervous systems are going to have a small window of functioning of life energy, right? They're not going to challenge you a lot. Maybe little bits, but they're mostly going to do what you say. And there's going to be kind of a manageable amount of life energy because everyone's in survival. But what the constellations also show is that in our generation and the next generations and this is where it's starting to unthaw. Okay. And this is my perspective and what I've seen and what I've studied and, so we start to unthaw. Now, when we start to unthaw, now we don't feel fine. Now we're actually feeling all the shittiness that wasn't felt in all those generations. Now we're like, my tummy is awful. I have pain here, I have pain there. And this is where we are the generation that's actually unthawing and feeling it. And we can pathologize ourselves. Like, I can't tell you how many clients I've had. They're like, what's wrong with me? Like, my mom's fine, my grandma's fine, but well, are they fine? Or were they showed up with what they had? And now there's enough safety. There's enough ground in the world around us. We have enough resource that it's actually starting to unthaw, which is how healing works. We will not unthaw. The nervous system will not start to work through stuff till there's a certain amount of safety. And the first step of unthawing is symptoms and contraction and all kinds of stuff. Getting sick, illness, it's wild. We won't get sick when we're in survival. There's no time for it. But when we start to have resource, then the body will start to show illness and start to show these things. And the thing that's important to understand about that is it means that our children, like in my case, where I've done a lot of work on myself, I've unwound a lot in my nervous system and worked through a lot of that. And of course, there's going to be other layers that I have to work through, and my children and my children's children, but I've done a lot of the work. So now my child, they're going to come in with more vitality. The shutdown isn't there in the same way, right? They're not carrying as much trauma. And when we take away the trauma, we bring in more vitality. That's actually what happens. More vitality. The spectrum of what that being can hold is much bigger, you know? And so what I think the challenge is for us is to understand that we can't necessarily look back to the other generations to decide what healthy parenting looks like or what a regulated child looks like, you know? And even I think of some of the techniques and things we've been learning from school systems, which I think are valuable, but we have to be careful that we understand that our children are in a different context and they're showing up in a different way. And what my perspective is that they're actually here to show us what it's like to be in more vitality. They're actually here to show us what it's like to be in more of the emotional range of being human. They're actually here to help shake loose the numbness, the shutdown, the frozenness that lives inside of us. And when we can see it that way, they're such a gift. And so, you know, why I'm wanting to speak to this is maybe you are one of those people that's been walking around with the narrative, which is very strong in our culture, that, our parents and our parents' parents and they were, more regulated and more capable and and then this generation is more, what's the word, like, spoiled, or there's something about this, right? Out of control, dysregulated, dysregulated, anxious, so many mental health things. What I would say is that the ancestral trauma is actually unthawing, and this is the generations where we're actually dealing with the repercussions, but that this is also the generation where we're more in ourselves and we're unthawing enough and coming out of the trauma enough that more vitality and curiosity and creativity can actually meet that. And for me, watching many people do ancestral healing, I have watched that show up over and over and over and over and over and over and over, that's what's happening. And I think that that's exciting because we're getting to parent this next generation, and we get to unwind and help hold them in the beauty of how life is healing itself through the generations. This is generational healing, and we're working at a piece at a time. So thank you for hanging out. Thanks for listening. Please send a comment or let me know what's helpful. I'm wanting to refine how I talk about this so that I can help more and more parents. Now for the bonus, I wanted to give a couple ideas of how to do bedtime. So a few tips, because this is often where parents can be a bit struggly. And this will work with both whale children and hummingbird children. And this will also help you. So one of the things that I have found to be so helpful is at a certain time of night, either lighting a candle and turning out the lights. I did that one. That one was the first one I did when I was really helping my son learn after breastfeeding. But the other thing is have red lights in the bedroom. So instead of having bright lights when you're reading, etc., there's a time at night where we just turn on the red lights. And so for us in our bedroom, all of our lights in the bedroom are red lights. And what red light does is it starts to support our circadian rhythm to calm. It starts to support, like, it's signaling. It's like the fire burning at night, right? When our ancestors would be the fire. As the fire is going out, it starts to turn more an orangey reddish color and not as vibrant, right? And so there's something that gets stimulated when it's like we put on the red lights. It already starts to downregulate, like the minute we put on the red light, right? And so I put that on quite a bit before we go to sleep, just when we start the bed routine. The other thing is, if you have a hummingbird child, plan to go into the bedroom and get a bunch of energy out, you know? Go into the bedroom and like wrestle and throw them and do somersaults, like really move the energy and plan that, because they're going to want to connect in that way. They're going to want to move in that way. We have to let go of the idea, this is time for bedtime and we need to calm down. We want to actually give space for their hummingbird vitality, right? Now with dorsal children, you might also want to do that, but you might want to like lay on the bed and roll around, or grab their knees or their feet and just wiggle them about, you know, bring in a little bit of play and touch to their body, you know, just to bring in a little bit of that life energy too, that life connection, dynamic energy, but it might not be as big. Right? It might just be holding their feet and rocking their legs back and forth, squeezing their arms and legs, making eye contact, giggling a little bit, this kind of thing. The other thing that really helps kids regulate is if I start to walk. I walk slower. I talk slower. I make slower movements. It's wild how much that works. Like literally, not doing anything to them, just walking slower, talking slower. And when I'm reading, I'll talk really slow. And we're just like slowly letting the nervous system know, oh, we're like winding down. The other one that's would be really helpful for both hummingbird and whale children is squeezing their body, so that if inside there's any dysregulation, it'll help them settle. So, and I squeeze pretty hard, okay? And you'll feel it. What'll happen is, let's say you squeeze their arm and you squeeze pretty hard, there will literally be a place where you feel them relax, okay? I squeeze my son's rib cage, I squeeze his arms, and what's happening is we're creating a sense of containment and ground, and anywhere inside where there's a bit of that angsty energy, it just helps it, okay? And then eye contact, cuddles. It's amazing how much, if we can really be present with them and we are slowing down, that they'll get the transmission through us.